Welcome everyone, Simon here from the Wales of Wall Street. Hope you're doing fantastically well wherever you are. I've got a new microphone, hopefully it sounds alright. To be honest, I did a couple of audio tests and it seemed alright, but let me know if there's any issues. Guys, we're going to be talking about Hedera hash graph in this video today, HBAR on the exchange. It's a project that I've held for I think around 5 years now. Got into the kind of entry points. God, it must have been around 8 to 12 cents, I think, when I was getting into Hedera. I mean, obviously, if you look at the price points today, which we'll talk about in more detail shortly, and it's around 25. So you can imagine there's not a humongous difference, but of course, along the way, I have made various trades over these years. But more importantly, which I always mention on this channel, is I'm in with a lot of these projects for the long term. Hedera is one of those. Yes, of course, there are opportunities from a trade perspective along the way. I don't really indulge too much into that just because I have lack of time more than anything. And it's, of course, something I've been consciously trying to do over the years is to condense the portfolio more and more. As profits are taken and try and reduce my asset holdings. But HBAR for sure is one of the ones I take great pride and care in over the time to accumulate where possible for that longer term gain. We'll go into the topic really for this video around the digital IDs aspect of Hedera. Great news as of the last few days will restructure that kind of conversation that we've had for many topics on many different videos across the years on this and Hedera's position on that and how it can affect the HBAR price, as well as really reinforcing my thoughts and appraisal towards Hedera as a project and technology. Guys, before we do that, don't forget to check out some other videos on the channel. Of course, some of the most recent ones are on here are a few months out of date for a number of reasons why I've not been doing the channel recently. But hopefully now with the microphone here, we'll be getting back onto this to daily videos. You'll be pleased to know, if you're still with us, that is. And don't forget, of course, to smash that like button and the subscribe button if you have not done so already. So, guys, let's go into this topic once and for all. So first and foremost, get rid of the cookies. The Hashgraph Group launches its self-sovereign identity platform IDTrust to power digital identity at scale. Now, there's first of all a couple of instances I want to discuss around digital IDs. As I said, a topic that we've been talking about for a long time. We're also going to kind of discuss a bit further detail around why this is such an important move for not just us as investors, but what's the real world requirement here? What are the problems that it's solving, and vice versa? Now, digital identities, DIDs, we've talked about this particularly with IOTA, for example. Energy Web, we've done quite a few videos on. We've kind of touched on, I think, some of these areas in Egovernment, Hedera, of course, many times in the past also. Those are kind of like the key projects that I have in my portfolio that have been very much focused on the digital identity aspect. And this, one of the most recent sort of abbreviations that's come into the equation of conversation around this area is verifiable credentials. Now, there's a lot of things going on around the world at the moment where digital identities could be greatly favored. I'm not going to turn this into a political video, mainly because it will probably get shut down, but I think you can all imagine the kind of areas of interest that this could really cater for, as well as the general utilization for everyday use from the general public, whether it be for healthcare, transport in general, our IDs in general as well, passports, driving licenses, etc. And I guess it goes even into some spheres of how we process and validate things moving forwards. How can we make it quicker to process and validate identifications to make us be able to apply for things quicker or have checks made quicker. And some of these instances, there is actually quite a lot of money loss. Some people get fed up with waiting. Some people don't have the right credentials to be able to do something. Real estate, for example, buying and selling houses. It's all starting to come together, in my opinion. I think this year's quite exciting. We talked about the RTGS system going live in November this year. So the entirety of the financial framework around the world will be changing significantly. To the general public, they probably won't even notice. But there'll be a lot of things happening between now and 2030 for the Agenda 30 program by the World Economic Forum to have in place all of these little elements. It's quite amazing, really, to have seen this journey. We talked about it from pretty much day one on this channel. Some of these things have been talking about for many, many, many years, like 10, 15-ish, maybe even more years. And to actually see the trends and the patterns of these things coming together, I kind of actually always note that a lot of these things people are very much against. Potential issues with digital identities around privacy, data, what are we actually using them for, all this kind of stuff. We've kind of warned about those elements and how we're going into this like dystopian world, really. But as an investor, you have to sit back and look at the broader picture, look at the bigger picture as to what's really going on. So Hashgraph, for those that don't know, if you're new to the channel, for example, or you're new to perhaps Hashgraph as a project, won't go into giant detail because I've got previous introductory videos on this, but it's one of my favorite ones, like IOTA, for example, because it's slightly different. It's still blockchain, of course. It's still a DLT, but it formulates itself slightly differently in a structure called Hashgraph. This can also be kind of explained as what they call direct or directed, I think is actually the real word. Direct acyclic graph, that's what I've always called it, DAG. This is not to be confused with Constellation, albeit Constellation is also a DAG protocol. But I always found this a fascinating avenue of how blockchain could evolve. I always call it an evolution of blockchain. I think those in the industry or a lot higher up would maybe disagree and just say it is what it is. But there's many different examples I've always given on that. But the ultimate kind of overall explanation of a DAG system is the ability to essentially kind of utilize multiple and simultaneously multiple digital devices or transactions. And again, I'll repeat from previous videos, that's not just financial transactions. I'm talking about a transfer in action. So it could be a drone delivery, someone entering a driverless car. All of these things require an action or a transfer of an action, i.e. validation, processing, purchasing, selling, you name it. And that's why it's really important when we look at things like transactions per second. It's not like Visa where they can do maybe a few thousand per second. Maybe it's a bit more than that since the upgrades, of course, with Swift, etc. But a lot of blockchains boast like 100,000, 500,000 transactions per second. You sit there maybe going, well, why do we need that many? But actually, if you look at the scale, and this is where we're talking about the word scalability and scale in general, imagine if anyone and everyone is using digital IDs moving forward, and everything that we do moving forward is also going to be used and validated via blockchain and AI and IoT devices, anything on the internet, and these are all done simultaneously. So maybe you're talking about something that something simple will then turn into actually we need a requirement of say 20 transactions or actions of transfer within this one activity, whereas we may have used maybe one or two before and very manually processed. A lot are done by administrative work or a laboured process in the background, which a lot of has become more automated, of course, over the years. It can now be done simultaneously with the use of direct acyclic graph, because it also means that it can talk to one another's transactional points, but it can also potentially skip some. So if it actually needs to go, right, we don't need these parts of the process, or perhaps the linear line, if you're talking about a logistical process, for example, it can actually skip that. But it knows that also from that point A to Z, in between all the things that need doing can be sped up significantly, or it may even need to just go from A to Z directly. So it will improve so many things in the economy, technology, all these kind of things. When we loop it back around to digital identifiers or DIDs, this is where it becomes that point about transactions per second. Imagine if anyone and everyone is using it all the time, whether we're getting on buses or trains or airports, or having our driving licenses in general for getting into a bar, or applying for loans, banks, etc., etc. I mean, the countless times. I've been using contactless payments, I don't know, 10, 15, maybe 15 years, around about that time, maybe slightly less than that. I don't know when it all started, but I was a very early adopter of it. And I remember I went to London and I bought something because I knew the card was on my phone. On my phone, that was probably like 10 years ago. But before that, we had like the contactless cards, and I couldn't quite figure it out because people used to put chip and pin in, right? And then all of a sudden people were like, oh, by the way, you can tap your card. I'm like, what do you mean? It was like, oh, these symbols on your card, like the Wi-Fi looking symbol, that allows you to pay contactlessly. I was like, really? Oh, okay. And I thought, oh, this is a bit dangerous. Like, people could just ping their cards on these things left, right, and center, and not really monitor how much they're spending, etc. But as time went on, of course, that evolved and people use it more and more. And I've made reference to this before. I've been to many sort of trade finance events, particularly with blockchain utilization. The TFDI, for example, with Andre Custerman was the most recent one. And they said they had a goal. I think it was like 2015 as part of the agenda program. They wanted to increase cashless payments by 300% by, I think, 2021. Obviously, the pandemic came, convenient timing. And it actually increased by like 13,500%, which is incredible. It means that we can speed up processing of payments, things that can be purchased quicker. And it's the same principle really for DIDs. So in this aspect of blockchain, it's not just the transaction itself, all the things in between. So the credentials that are issued, the recording of it, how it was used, the metadata. So relying in this aspect of who's validating it and which end, and if both ends are, how do they come together to have an agreement that this is fine and we can process and continue this transaction, whether that's blocked, i.e. for example the revoking of that, and then the credential actually being used in general. So there's actually a couple of number of things that are being used as case studies at this moment in time for the DID application. Now, what's really interesting, we'll just go back to this article quickly. There's a lot of mention here about its abilities and its structure of how it's going to be working over the next few years, its involvement with other areas, for example, agentic AI, which we talked about before. But it's this bit here, e-government services and systems. Now, we've reported on this many times before. We talked about the digital wallet in the UK a few years back now. And if you remember, we were following the contractual process. It was a bit weird. The company that kind of like won it, I think was called like Ken & Carter. And actually it very much got to a stage where I think they got bought out quite quickly after that process kind of validated itself and completed. But this all kind of led to that area of interest around how this digital wallet would have the capability moving forward. What would it actually do? What would it actually be needed for? And whilst we could have, for example, your HMRC or tax aspects on there, we can also delve into the abilities of it to hold our passport, for example, in the near future, or indeed things like our driving licenses. On this aspect, it says that we could save £45 billion and drive efficiency and growth utilising drivers' licenses in a digital format. Now, I haven't looked into the exact implications of that, but it says here, we'll go through this together, it will use digital tools and data to transform public services and help taxpayer benefit from 45 billion in efficiency savings, essentially to delivering our plan for change. Now, that's quite a substantial amount of money, really. And you could multiply that on a significant level if you were talking about similar things, for example, in the US or Africa, the Middle East, etc. How much those monetary values could be equating to. So when you're looking at the profit and loss at the end of the year, or as a government, and you're saying, well, where can we save some money? And they go, well, actually, one of the quickest, easiest things to do is have our paper or card processing aspects diminish and use this in a digital format. I think this is a very interesting side of the equation for sure, but it shows, okay, this is a great idea, but how will it work? It does need to be validated. It does need to be processed. We need to use AI algorithms as well, of course, to find interesting bits of data or information that perhaps need to be plucked out to say, well, actually, we need to think about this person, the considerations of this person, or this, that, and the other, as to why they should or shouldn't have ID, or loads of different things that could be pulled out of this. So this is very much supposed to be launching this year as a prime example. And I'm not suggesting that HBAR or Hedera is used directly with this, but there's a lot of things on here that suggest that this is a massive requirement. So when we go back to the principles of what digital identities can do, if we looked at, for example, why is Africa, for example, such a massive area of interest to Hedera? Well, the fact of the matter is, let's say MEA as an overall arching topic here. So you've got the Middle East and Africa, right? Here, as a global estimate, this is, by the way, I've kind of gathered some research additionally to this. Global digital identity solutions around about now are worth between sort of $36 and $42 billion. And by 2030, this can reach up to $154 billion. So that's a CAGR of around 17 to 21%, which is absolutely phenomenal. Now, if we look at the MEA, why are we not, or why are these companies not progressing, the likes of US, UK, etc., as a prime target first? Well, the answer is we've got so many frameworks and standardizations to tick off. And that's not to say that Africa and Middle East don't have theirs. Of course, they have structured, legislations and standards and things like this. But we did a video on this a while back of how many people are unbankable in the world. And even in Africa, I mean, we're talking about billions of people potentially that are unbankable. And they're now getting banks because of the better internet connections that are out there. For example, Starlink is a great example of being able to find and locate internet connectivity in the middle of nowhere now, thanks to the GPS uprising and the ability to transmit Wi-Fi from above down. So this opens up a huge market. MEA at this current time is worth around 2.74 billion. So in contrast to the global aspect, of course, it's a small percentage, but by 2030, they anticipate that to be 7.10 billion. And then we look at the verification sub-segments, so how that could be developed in some certain areas, and the numbers are pretty similar in terms of the percentage increase from now to 2030 of 728 million to 1.8 billion. South Africa, as an area of its own, a region of its own, 267 million today's dollars worth, to $696 million worth in 2030. So there's a huge market opportunity here for companies like Hedera to jump in, to go to the governments, to go to all these companies that need identity requirements or verification processing. That's your market. Now, HBAR as a token, of course, gets utilized in various different ways. And I'm not suggesting that, the click of a finger, this is all of a sudden going to, start going absolutely crazy. But the point is that over time, HBAR's token aspect will be used significantly more. We've talked about the DIDs, we've talked about the VCs. There's also the other aspects. We won't go into this video in particular, but the OpenID, I think it's called 4VCI. I've got my notes here somewhere. And there's also one, the D4VP. These are all humongous data or off-chain data storing aspects. Where we're utilizing currently cloud, there is quantum computing around the corner, of course, as well. But a lot of the frameworks around the world are utilizing all these different labeling systems, these different abilities to be able to verify and process identification more and more in the future, and give more identifications in an easier fashion to those that are perhaps not even native to the country, for example, or have a requirement or need to be able to open a bank and start contributing to the economy, to taxes, etc., etc. Now, there's always pros and cons to all of this. Of course, from having the aspect of a digital ID, you'll be ticking some certain boxes. For example, well, we've seen an example here of the driving license. It could potentially prevent fraud. You could have us as the actual owner of our ID and see where it's going to, who's using our identification. Because a lot of the time, actually, guys, not necessarily our driving license and things, but a lot of our information does go to sub-brands or third parties without our permission, without our knowledge, or maybe there's some small text that we haven't read and it just does it anyway. We can actually have more control of this. We can turn things on and off. We can even potentially get paid for this in the future, utilizing that blockchain transparency model that comes with blockchain framework. You've got instant verification, so the speeding up of onboarding, the know your customer aspects. We talked about banking as an example. We talked about the potential of that sharing capability, what we do and don't want shared, the interoperability for that to be able to be used all over the place, or maybe speed up another element of a verification process because you've already done one back here with your digital ID and you don't have to scramble around trying to find your ID, or if it's lost from your wallet and things like this. And of course, there's the sustainable aspects, the reduction in paper, card, letters, etc., the eco-friendly side of it, which is what a big part of what blockchain stands for, as does Hedera. The concern side, of course, is the surveillance risk. We talked about that in a multitude of arenas over the years in various different videos. How could it be misused? For example, the hacking vulnerability. Now, blockchain in general is very secure. However, quantum computing is speeding up significantly, and it is ultimately not necessarily a competitor to blockchain, but it's certainly something that everyone needs to be aware of how fast these things can really take off. The potential aspect of those that don't have an internet connection, and let's say we, not necessarily maybe now or in 5 years time, but maybe in 10 years time, they scrap paper abilities of licenses and passports and things completely. What if you don't have internet at that point, or you can't afford it, or you're struggling for connections and things like this? There's loads of things that need to be considered and still put into place to help support those that don't have these opportunities. And then kind of, I guess, the ethical use. Now, I'm not going to go too much into the conspiracy theories that I've enjoyed talking about over many, many years. However, it is important to mention because these things are on the horizon. Whether you think they're conspiracies or not, they are being talked about. They have got standards and rules and regulations and laws being conducted right now to associate these as being reality to us as humans, as the general public in these coming years. Things like, for example, social scoring, behavioral scoring, environmental or emission scoring. Now, how far these go, I don't know at this moment in time, but the concepts there are that, for an example, an emission score, if it's too high, you won't be allowed to drive your driverless car, which is on a SIM card, i.e. digital and digital identity verified to be able to use it outside an X amount of a miles radius, or be forced to have to cycle or walk and gain points for that, which you can then convert to tokens or have rewarding of being able to do other things. Or if you don't follow certain rules, you could get shut down, whether it be a financial aspect, whether it be traveling or certifications of certain things, for example, viruses, etc. This is where it's going. So there is an ethical aspect of this for sure. Yes, okay, you could argue that even if you had a paper driving license at this moment in time, that could still apply. But as things get more digitally focused, it becomes increasingly quicker and more easily identifiable to shut certain things down around certain people's lifestyles or abilities to do and not do things. So there's a lot of things here, but as an investor, as I said many times before, you have to kind of take a seat back and look at the opportunity. We always talk about monetary values, we talk about market opportunities here, and we talked about how this can potentially work. in an advantage and also the potential disadvantages of its uses case. However, as an investor, this is extremely exciting because finally, after years and years of talk, we are now seeing action. The actual abilities of these blockchain projects and technologies and the people behind them putting their money where their mouth is, and we're finally seeing the developments come into fruition more than ever before. And whilst it can be scary, it's also exciting to that extent to see what is on the horizon, what benefits could we get out of this. And especially, as I said, as an investor, it absolutely ticks those boxes 100% to be excited about what we're holding. So when we look at the Hedera hash graph price point in the chart, HBAR for short, HBAR, you can see there was not too much of retaliation over the last few years, and I'm not expecting much anyway. The market trends always try and push in the same direction most of the time. We're in a consolidation period, as we've had obviously those upscales over the last few weeks, especially in July, where we saw Bitcoin reach new all-time highs. Many other projects did also. Hedera hasn't hit its previous all-time high, but what's really exciting is its stability around this longer-term fib level here between 22 cents and 27.28 cents respectively. It did jump up slightly higher than that to 30, couldn't quite sustain that and came back down. So in my opinion, we're in probably where it should be right now. Where will it be going in the near future? Well, I anticipate some sideways traction for sure, maybe a potential retest down to some of these lower levels around 18 cents again, but we'll see. However, I think the market trend at the moment is quite secure in the sense that these next few months, especially with the RTGS system going live and the excitement around that, which will, I'm sure, channel lots of videos to be talking about it finally more and more, the ISO compliance, etc., etc. And all of these kind of case studies coming in more and more, these topics coming in more and more to push these price points up further, to get to a level really where there is now that emphasis of real world use case. And that's where I think Hedera is right now. It's now starting to portray what is actually physically possible and what is actually enabled right now. We can go from now with this solution upwards. So those that want the anticipation of HBAR as a token being used more and more, this time is coming. I do think that within the next 2 to 3 or up to 2030 will be a significant change to all these what I call legacy projects, some of the original ones here, where people were saying, oh, it's too slow, it's not moving. Well, if you're a long time holder like me, you'll be seeing some significant reward coming back already, let alone what we'll see over these coming years. So I fully anticipate a very exciting further journey for Hedera, where we'll probably smash through the all-time high, maybe even this year, hopefully, past that 60-cent mark and maybe to the next levels of 80 cents. Who knows, maybe even towards that 128 longer-term projection of the fib levels here for HBAR's price. We'll just have to see. I'm not looking too much further into the future, but I predicted in the past where I thought maybe Hedera could get to at least $2-3 this year. It all defines itself around the market's trends, the variables of things like where we are with interest rates, people's disposable income, the excitement around all these things, and the knowledge as well. I think that's the important part as well. Governments and things will come out more and more about we're using digital IDs. Okay, they may not mention all the time who's behind the abilities of this capability, but those that do research will go, oh, digital ID, how does this work? How is it being processed? Well, we'll see an indication of that for sure, especially as more people, the general public, are coming into crypto more and more. We may see these numbers go very crazy over the coming years. That's my last sort of thoughts really on HBAR as a project video. Thanks for watching, guys. Let us know your thoughts and opinions and comments below. Really appreciate those. It's good to be back, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care and bye-bye.